What starts here changes the world. I have a few suggestions that may help you on your way to a better world. And while these lessons were learned during my time in the military, I can assure you that it matters not whether you ever served a day in uniform. It matters not your gender, your ethnic or religious background, your orientation, or your social status. Our struggles in this world are similar, and the lessons to overcome those struggles and to move forward, changing ourselves and changing the world around us, will apply equally to all. So here are the 10 lessons I learned from basic SEAL training that hopefully will be of value to you as you move forward in life. Every morning in SEAL training, my instructors, who at the time were all Vietnam veterans, would show up in my barracks room, and the first thing they'd do was inspect my bed. If you did it right, the corners would be square, the covers would be pulled tight, the pillow centered just under the headboard, and the extra blanket folded neatly at the foot of the rack. It was a simple task, mundane at best, but every morning we were required to make our bed to perfection. It seemed a little ridiculous at the time, particularly in light of the fact that we were aspiring to be real warriors, tough, battle-hardened SEALs. But the wisdom of this simple act has been proven to me many times over. If you make your bed every morning, you will have accomplished the first task of the day. It will give you a small sense of pride, and it will encourage you to do another task, and another, and another. And by the end of the day, that one task completed will have turned into many tasks completed. Making your bed will also reinforce the fact that the little things in life matter. If you can't do the little things right, you'll never be able to do the big things right. And if by chance you have a miserable day, you will come home to a bed that is made, that you made. And a made bed gives you encouragement that tomorrow will be better. So if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. During SEAL training, the students are all broken down into boat crews. Each crew is 7 students, 3 on each side of a small rubber boat, and 1 coxswain to help guide the dinghy. Every day your boat crew forms up on the beach and is instructed to get through the surf zone and paddle several miles down the coast. In the winter, the surf off San Diego can get to be 8 to 10 feet high, and it is exceedingly difficult to paddle through the plunging surf unless everyone digs in. Every paddle must be synchronized to the stroke count of the coxswain. Everyone must exert equal effort, or the boat will turn against the wave and be unceremoniously dumped back on the beach. For the boat to make it to its destination, everyone must paddle. You can't change the world alone. You will need some help. And to truly get from your starting point to your destination takes friends, colleagues, the goodwill of strangers, and a strong coxswain to guide you. If you want to change the world, find someone to help you paddle. Over a few weeks of difficult training, my SEAL class, which started with 150 men, was down to just 42. There were now 6 boat crews of 7 men each. I was in the boat with the tall guys, but the best boat crew we had was made up of the little guys, the Munchkin crew, we called them. No one was over 5'5". The Munchkin boat crew had 1 American Indian, 1 African American, 1 Polish American, 1 Greek American, 1 Italian American, and 2 tough kids from the Midwest. They out-paddled, outran, and outswam all the other boat crews. The big men in the other boat crews would always make good-natured fun of the tiny little flippers the Munchkins put on their tiny little feet prior to every swim. But somehow these little guys from every corner of the nation and the world always had the last laugh, swimming faster than everyone and reaching the shore long before the rest of us. SEAL training was a great equalizer. Nothing mattered but your will to succeed, not your color, not your ethnic background, not your education, not your social status. If you want to change the world, measure a person by the size of their heart, not by the size of their flippers. Several times a week, the instructors would line up the class and do a uniform inspection. It was exceptionally thorough. Your hat had to be perfectly starched, your uniform immaculately pressed, your belt buckle shiny and void of any smudges. But it seemed that no matter how much effort you put into starching your hat or pressing your uniform or polishing your belt buckle, it just wasn't good enough. The instructors would find something wrong. For failing uniform inspection, the student had to run fully clothed into the surf zone, then wet from head to toe, roll around on the beach until every part of your body was covered with sand. The effect was known as sugar cookie. You stayed in the uniform the rest of the day, cold, wet, and sandy. There were many a student who just couldn't accept the fact that all their efforts were in vain, that no matter how hard they tried to get the uniform right, it went unappreciated. Those students didn't make it through training. Those students didn't understand the purpose of the drill. You were never going to succeed. You were never going to have a perfect uniform. The instructors weren't going to allow it. Sometimes, no matter how well you prepare or how well you perform, you still end up as a sugar cookie. It's just the way life is sometimes. If you want to change the world, get over being a sugar cookie and keep moving forward. Every day during training, you were challenged with multiple physical events: long runs, long swims, obstacle courses, hours of calisthenics, something designed to test your mettle. Every event had standards, times you had to meet. If you failed to meet those times, those standards, your name was posted on a list, and at the end of the day, those on the list were invited to a circus. A circus was 2 hours of additional calisthenics, designed to wear you down, to break your spirit, to force you to quit. No one wanted a circus. A circus meant that for that day, you didn't measure up. A circus meant more fatigue, and more fatigue meant that the following day would be more difficult, and more circuses were likely. But at some time during SEAL training, everyone made the circus list. But an interesting thing happened to those who were constantly on the list. Over time, those students who did 2 hours of extra calisthenics got stronger and stronger. The pain of the circuses built inner strength and physical resiliency. Life is filled with circuses. You will fail. You will likely fail often. It will be painful. It will be discouraging. At times, it will test you to your very core. But if you want to change the world, don't be afraid of the circuses. At least twice a week, the trainees were required to run the obstacle course. The obstacle course contained 25 obstacles, including a 10-foot wall, a 30-foot cargo net, a barbed wire crawl, to name a few. But the most challenging obstacle was the slide for life. It had a 3-level, 30-foot tower at one end and a 1-level tower at the other. In between was a 200-foot long rope. You had to climb the 3-tiered tower, and once at the top, you grabbed the rope, swung underneath the rope, and pulled yourself hand over hand until you got to the other end. The record for the obstacle course had stood for years when my class began in 1977. The record seemed unbeatable until one day a student decided to go down the slide for life head first. Instead of swinging his body underneath the rope and inching his way down, he bravely mounted the top of the rope and thrust himself forward. It was a dangerous move, seemingly foolish and fraught with risk. Failure could mean injury and being dropped from the course. Without hesitation, the student slid down the rope perilously fast. Instead of several minutes, it only took him half that time. And by the end of the course, he had broken the record. If you want to change the world, sometimes you have to slide down the obstacles head first. During the land warfare phase of training, the students are flown out to San Clemente Island, which lies off the coast of San Diego. The waters off San Clemente are a breeding ground for the great white sharks. To pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is the night swim. Before the swim, the instructors joyfully brief the students on all the species of sharks that inhabit the waters off San Clemente. They assure you, however, that no student has ever been eaten by a shark, at least not that they can remember. But you are also taught that if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground. Do not swim away. Do not act afraid. And if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you, then summons up all your strength and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. There are a lot of sharks in the world. If you hope to complete the swim, you will have to deal with them. So if you want to change the world, don't back down from the sharks. As Navy SEALs, one of our jobs is to conduct underwater attacks against enemy shipping. We practice this technique extensively during training. The ship attack mission is where a pair of SEAL divers is dropped off outside an enemy harbor and then swims well over 2 miles underwater, using nothing but a depth gauge and a compass to get to the target. During the entire swim, even well below the surface, there is some light that comes through. It is comforting to know that there is open water above you. But as you approach the ship, which is tied to a pier, the light begins to fade. The steel structure of the ship blocks the moonlight. It blocks the surrounding street lamps. It blocks all ambient light. To be successful in your mission, you have to swim under the ship and find the keel, the center line, and the deepest part of the ship. This is your objective. But the keel is also the darkest part of the ship, where you cannot see your hand in front of your face, where the noise from the ship's machinery is deafening, and where it gets to be easily disoriented, and you can fail. Every SEAL knows that under the keel, at that darkest moment of the mission, is a time when you need to be calm, when you must be calm, when you must be composed, when all your tactical skills, your physical power, and your inner strength must be brought to bear. If you want to change the world, you must be your very best in the darkest moments. The 9th week of training is referred to as Hell Week. It is 6 days of no sleep, constant physical and mental harassment, and one special day at the Mud Flats. The Mud Flats are an area between San Diego and Tijuana where the water runs off and creates the Tijuana Sloughs, a swampy patch of terrain where the mud will engulf you. It is on Wednesday of Hell Week that you paddle down to the Mud Flats and spend the next 15 hours trying to survive this freezing cold, the howling wind, and the incessant pressure to quit from the instructors. As the sun began to set that Wednesday evening, my training class, having committed some egregious infraction of the rules, was ordered into the mud. The mud consumed each man till there was nothing visible but our heads. The instructors told us we could leave the mud if only 5 men would quit. Only 5 men, just 5 men, and we could get out of the oppressive cold. Looking around the mud flat, it was apparent that some students were about to give up. It was still over 8 hours till the sun came up. 8 more hours of bone-chilling cold. The chattering teeth and the shivering moans of the trainees were so loud, it was hard to hear anything. And then one voice began to echo through the night. One voice raised in song. The song was terribly out of tune, but sung with great enthusiasm. One voice became 2, and 2 became 3, and before long, everyone in the class was singing. The instructors threatened us with more time in the mud if we kept up the singing, but the singing persisted. And somehow the mud seemed a little warmer, and the wind a little tamer, and the dawn not so far away. If I have learned anything in my time traveling the world, it is the power of hope. The power of one person, a Washington, a Lincoln, King, Mandela, and even a young girl from Pakistan, Malala. One person can change the world by giving people hope. So if you want to change the world, start singing when you're up to your neck in mud. Finally, in SEAL training, there's a bell. A brass bell that hangs in the center of the compound for all the students to see. All you have to do to quit, is ring the bell. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to wake up at 5 o'clock. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to be in the freezing cold swims. Ring the bell, and you no longer have to do the runs, the obstacle course, the PT, and you no longer have to endure the hardships of training. All you have to do is ring the bell to get out. If you want to change the world, don't ever, ever ring the bell. It will not be easy. Start each day with a task completed. Find someone to help you through life. Respect everyone. Know that life is not fair and that you will fail often. But if you take some risks, step up when the times are the toughest, face down the bullies, lift up the downtrodden, and never, ever give up. If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today. And what started here will indeed have changed the world for the better. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, thank you, President Powers, for basic SEAL training in Coronado, California. What starts
Many people face the news each morning with trepidation and dread. Every day we read of shootings, inequality, pollution, dictatorship, war, and the spread of nuclear weapons. These are some of the reasons that 2016 was called the worst year ever, until 2017 claimed that record and left many people longing for earlier decades when the world seemed safer, cleaner, and more equal. But is this a sensible way to understand the human condition in the 21st century? As Franklin Pierce Adams pointed out, nothing is more responsible for the good old days than a bad memory. You can always fool yourself into seeing a decline if you compare bleeding headlines of the present with rose-tinted images of the past. What does the trajectory of the world look like when we measure well-being over time using a constant yardstick? Let's compare the most recent data on the present with the same measures 30 years ago. Last year, Americans killed each other at a rate of 5.3 per 100,000, had 7% of their citizens in poverty, and emitted 21 million tons of particulate matter and 4 million tons of sulfur dioxide. But 30 years ago, the homicide rate was 8.5 per 100,000, poverty rate was 12%, and we emitted 35 million tons of particulate matter and 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide. What about the world as a whole? Last year, the world had 12 ongoing wars, 60 autocracies, 10% of the world population in extreme poverty, and more than 10,000 nuclear weapons. But 30 years ago, there were 23 wars, 85 autocracies, 37% of the world population in extreme poverty, and more than 60,000 nuclear weapons. True, last year was a terrible year for terrorism in Western Europe, with 238 deaths. But 1988 was worse, with 440 deaths. What's going on? Was 1988 a particularly bad year? Or are these improvements a sign that the world, for all its troubles, gets better over time? Might we even invoke the admittedly old-fashioned notion of progress? To do so is to court a certain amount of derision, because I have found that intellectuals hate progress. And intellectuals who call themselves progressive really hate progress. Now, it's not that they hate the fruits of progress, mind you. Most academics and pundits would rather have their surgery with anesthesia than without it. It's the idea of progress that rankles the chattering class. If you believe that humans can improve their lot, I have been told, that means that you have a blind faith and a quasi-religious belief in the outmoded superstition and the false promise of the myth of the onward march of inexorable progress. You are a cheerleader for vulgar American can-doism, with the rah-rah spirit of boardroom ideology, Silicon Valley, and the Chamber of Commerce. You are a practitioner of Whig history, a naive optimist, a Pollyanna, and of course a Pangloss, alluding to the Voltaire character who declared, "All is for the best in the best of all possible worlds." Well, Professor Pangloss, as it happens, was a pessimist. A true optimist believes there could be much better worlds than the one we have today. But all of this is irrelevant because the question of whether progress has taken place is not a matter of faith or having an optimistic temperament or seeing the glass as half full. It's a testable hypothesis. For all their differences, people largely agree on what goes into human well-being. Life, health, sustenance, prosperity, peace, freedom, safety, knowledge, leisure, happiness. All of these things can be measured. If they have improved over time, that, I submit, is progress. Let's go to the data. Beginning with the most precious thing of all, life. For most of human history, life expectancy at birth was around 30. Today, worldwide, it is more than 70, and in the developed parts of the world, more than 80. 250 years ago, in the richest countries of the world, a third of the children did not live to see their 5th birthday. Before the risk was brought down 100-fold, today that fate befalls less than 6% of children in the poorest countries of the world. Famine is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It could bring devastation to any part of the world. Today, famine has been banished to the most remote and war-ravaged regions. 200 years ago, 90% of the world's population subsisted in extreme poverty. Today, fewer than 10% of people live. For most of human history, the powerful states and empires were pretty much always at war with each other, and peace was a mere interlude between wars. Today, they are never at war with each other. The last great power war pitted the United States against China 65 years ago. More recently, wars of all kinds have become fewer and less deadly. The annual rate of war has fallen from about 22 per 100,000 per year in the early 50s to 1.2 today. Democracy has suffered obvious setbacks in Venezuela, in Russia, in Turkey, and is threatened by the rise of authoritarian populism in Eastern Europe and the United States. Yet the world has never been more democratic than it has been in the past decade, with 2/3 of the world's people living in democracies. Homicide rates plunge whenever anarchy and the code of vendetta are replaced by the rule of law. It happened when feudal Europe was brought under the control of centralized kingdoms, so that today a Western European has 1/35th the chance of being murdered compared to his medieval ancestors. It happened again in colonial New England, in the American Wild West when the sheriffs moved to town, and in Mexico. Indeed, we've become safer in just about every way. Over the last century, we've become 96% less likely to be killed in a car crash, 88% less likely to be mowed down on the sidewalk, 99% less likely to die in a plane crash, 95% less likely to be killed on the job, 89% less likely to be killed by an act of God, such as a drought, flood, wildfire, storm, volcano, landslide, earthquake, or meteor strike, presumably not because God has become less angry with us, but because of improvements in the resilience of our infrastructure. And what about the quintessential act of God? the projectile hurled by Zeus himself. Yes, we are 97% less likely to be killed by a bolt of lightning. Before the 17th century, no more than 15% of Europeans could read or write. Europe and the United States achieved universal literacy by the middle of the 20th century, and the rest of the world is catching up. Today, more than 90% of the world's population under the age of 25 can read and write. In the 19th century, Westerners worked more than 60 hours per week. Today, they work fewer than 40. Thanks to the universal penetration of running water and electricity in the developed world, and the widespread adoption of washing machines, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, dishwashers, stoves, and microwaves, the amount of our lives that we forfeit to housework has fallen from 60 hours a week to fewer than 15 hours a week. Do all these gains in health, wealth, safety, knowledge, and leisure make us any happier? The answer is yes. In 86% of the world's countries, happiness has increased in recent decades. Well, I hope to have convinced you that progress is not a matter of faith or optimism, but is a fact of human history. Indeed, the greatest fact of human history. And how has this fact been covered in the news? A tabulation of positive and negative emotion words in news stories has shown that during the decades in which humanity has gotten healthier, wealthier, wiser, safer, and happier, the New York Times has become increasingly morose, and the world's broadcasts, too, have gotten steadily glummer. Why don't people appreciate progress? Part of the answer comes from our cognitive psychology. We estimate risk using a mental shortcut called the availability heuristic. The easier it is to recall something from memory, the more probable we judge it to be. The other part of the answer comes from the nature of journalism, captured in this satirical headline from The Onion: CNN holds morning meeting to decide what viewers should panic about for the rest of the day. News is about stuff that happens, not stuff that doesn't happen. You never see a journalist who says, "I'm reporting live from a country that has been at peace for 40 years," or a city that has not been attacked by terrorists. Also, bad things can happen quickly, but good things aren't built in a day. The papers could have run the headline, 137,000 people escaped from extreme poverty yesterday, every day for the last 25 years. That's 1.25 billion people leaving poverty behind, but you never read about it. Also, the news capitalizes on our morbid interest in what can go wrong, captured in the programming policy. If it bleeds, it leads. Well, if you combine our cognitive biases with the nature of news, you can see why the world has been coming to an end for a very long time indeed. Let me address some questions about progress that no doubt have occurred to many of you. First, isn't it good to be pessimistic, to safeguard against complacency, to rake the muck, to speak truth to power? Well, not exactly. It's good to be accurate. Of course, we should be aware of suffering and danger wherever they occur, but we should also be aware of how they can be reduced, because there are dangers to indiscriminate pessimism. One of them is fatalism. If all our efforts at improving the world have been in vain, why throw good money after bad? The poor will always be with you. And since the world will end soon, if climate change doesn't kill us all, then runaway artificial intelligence will, a natural response is to enjoy life while we can. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. The other danger of thoughtless pessimism is radicalism. If our institutions are all failing and beyond hope for reform, a natural response is to seek to smash the machine, drain the swamp, burn the empire to the ground, on the hope that whatever rises out of the ashes is bound to be better than what we have now. Well, if there is such a thing as progress, what causes it? Progress is not some mystical force or dialectic lifting us ever higher. It's not a mysterious arc of history bending toward justice. It's the result of human efforts governed by an idea that we associate with the 18th century Enlightenment, namely that if we apply reason and science that enhance human well-being, we can gradually succeed. Is progress inevitable? Of course not. Progress does not mean that everything becomes better for everyone, everywhere, all the time. That would be a miracle. And progress is not a miracle, but problem solving. Problems are inevitable, and solutions create new problems which have to be solved in their turn. The unsolved problems facing the world today are gargantuan, including the risks of climate change and nuclear war. But we must see them as problems to be solved, not apocalypses in waiting, and aggressively pursue solutions like deep decarbonization for climate change and global zero for nuclear war. Finally, does the Enlightenment go against human nature? This is an acute question for me, because I'm a prominent advocate of the existence of human nature with all its shortcomings and perversities. In my book, The Blank Slate, I argued that the human prospect is more tragic than utopian, and that we are not stardust, we are not golden, and there's no way we're getting back to the garden. But my worldview has lightened up in the 15 years since The Blank Slate was published. My acquaintance with the statistics of human progress, starting with violence and now encompassing every other aspect of our well-being, has fortified my belief that in understanding our tribulations and woes, human nature is the problem, but human nature, channeled by Enlightenment norms and institutions, is also the solution. Admittedly, it's not easy to replicate my own data-driven epiphany with humanity at large. Some intellectuals have responded with fury to my book Enlightenment Now, saying, first, how dare he claim that intellectuals hate progress? And second, how dare he claim that there has been progress? With others, the idea of progress just leaves them cold. Saving the lives of billions, eradicating disease, feeding the hungry, teaching kids to read, boring. At the same time, the most common response I've received from readers is gratitude. Gratitude for changing their view of the world from a numb and helpless fatalism to something more constructive, even heroic. I believe that the ideals of the Enlightenment can be cast as a stirring narrative, and I hope that people with greater artistic flair and rhetorical power than I can tell it better and spread it further. It goes something like this. We are born into a pitiless universe, facing steep odds against life-enabling order and in constant jeopardy of falling apart. We were shaped by a process that is ruthlessly competitive. We are made from crooked timber, vulnerable to illusions, self-centeredness, and at times astounding stupidity. Yet, human nature has also been blessed with resources that open a space for a kind of redemption. We are endowed with the power to combine ideas recursively, have thoughts about our thoughts. We have an instinct for language, allowing us to share the fruits of our ingenuity and experience. We are deepened with a capacity for sympathy, for pity, imagination, compassion, commiseration. These endowments have found ways to magnify their own power. The scope of language has been augmented by the written, printed, and electronic word. Our circle of sympathy has been expanded by history, journalism, and the narrative arts. And our puny rational faculties have been multiplied by the norms and institutions of reason. Intellectual curiosity, open debate, skepticism of authority and dogma, and the burden of proof to verify ideas by confronting them against reality. As the spiral of recursive improvement gathers momentum, we eke out victories against the forces that grind us down, not least the darker parts of our own nature. We penetrate the mysteries of the cosmos, including life and mind. We live longer, suffer less, learn more, get smarter, and enjoy more small pleasures and rich experiences. Fewer of us are killed, assaulted, enslaved, exploited, or oppressed by the others. From a few oases, the territories with peace and prosperity are growing and could someday encompass the globe. Much suffering remains, and tremendous peril, but ideas on how to reduce them have been voiced, and an infinite number of others are yet to be conceived. We will never have a perfect world, and it would be dangerous to seek one. But there's no limit to the betterments we can attain if we continue to apply knowledge to enhance human flourishing. This heroic story is not just another myth. Myths are fictions, but this one is true. True to the best of our knowledge, which is the only truth we can have. As we learn more, we can show which parts of the story continue to be true and which ones false, as any of them might be, and any could become. And this story belongs not to any tribe, but to all of humanity, to any sentient creature with the power of reason and the urge to persist in its being. For it requires only the convictions that life is better than death, health is better than sickness, abundance is better than want, freedom is better than coercion, happiness is better than suffering, and knowledge is better than ignorance and superstition. Thank you. When I taught a course and then wrote a book on rationality, I was confronted with a puzzle. On the one hand, our species can be proud of astonishing feats of rationality. We figured out how to get to the moon and take pictures of our home planet. We have plumbed the origins of the universe, the nature of life, the functioning of the mind. We have fought the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, reducing the toll of scourges that have immiserated humanity for millennia, including war, famine, poverty, and child mortality. At the same time, a majority of Americans aged 18 to 24 think that astrology is very or sort of scientific. Large proportions believe in conspiracy theories, such as that COVID-19 vaccines consist of microchips that Bill Gates is trying to implant in us to surveil us, or that the American deep state houses a cabal of cannibalistic, Satan-worshipping pedophiles. Many people fall for fake news, such as Joe Biden calls Trump supporters dregs of society, or Yoko Ono, I had an affair with Hillary Clinton in the 70s. And many believe in forms of paranormal woo-woo, such as possession by the devil, extrasensory perception, ghosts and spirits, witches, and spiritual energy in mountains, trees, and crystals. So, if people can be rational, why does humanity seem to be losing its mind? It's not an easy question, and I hope you will indulge me in a 4-part answer. The most obvious is motivated reasoning. Now, rationality is always in service of a goal. However, that goal need not be objective truth. It can also be to win an argument in which the stakes matter to you. As the journalist Upton Sinclair pointed out, it's hard to get a man to understand something when his livelihood depends on not understanding it. To show how wise and moral your group is, and your religion, your tribe, your political sect, and how stupid and evil the opposing one is, sometimes called the my side bias, and probably the most robust of the 200 or so biases that have been documented by cognitive and social psychology, and incidentally, the only one that is uncorrelated with intelligence. Smart people can be ingenious at figuring out why their side is superior to their rivals, and within a coalition to gain status and to avoid ostracism as a hero for your side. The second part of the explanation lies in primitive intuitions, ways that our species has made sense of the world for millennia. For example, the intuition of dualism, that a person has a body and a mind. When we deal with other people, we don't treat them as hunks of meat or robots or wind-up dolls, but we assume that there is a mind, a locus of beliefs and desires, even though we can't perceive it directly. Well, from there, it's a short step to suppose that there can also be minds without bodies, which leads to beliefs in spirits and souls and ghosts and afterlife, reincarnation, ESP. Another intuition that we are prone to is essentialism, that living things contain an invisible essence or stuff or power that gives them their form and their abilities. From there, it's a short step to believe that disease must be caused by some kind of adulteration of your pure essence by some foreign contaminant. And hence, we get resistance to vaccines, which, by the way, is as old as vaccines themselves. Because when you think about it, a vaccine consists of injecting into your flesh the very substance that causes the disease in the first place. It's not surprising that it is counterintuitive, and resistance to genetically modified organisms, which also seem to be adulterating the pure essence of your body with some kind of contaminant. It explains why people are receptive to various kinds of quack cures. We heard yesterday about threats to the northern white rhinoceros. One of the reasons the rhinoceros is so threatened is that there is a widespread belief that powdered rhinoceros horn is a cure for erectile dysfunction. And why people are receptive to homeopathy and herbal remedies, which seem to be infusing some kind of pure essence into the tissues of the body. And also why culture after culture have rediscovered the harebrained idea that you can cure disease through bloodletting and other forms of purging and fasting and getting rid of toxins. A third intuition that we use to make sense of the world is teleology. Now, we know that our own plans and artifacts are designed and organized with a purpose. Well, from there, it's a short step to imagine that the world is designed with a purpose, and so to be receptive to creationism and astrology and synchronicity, in the vague sense that everything happens for a reason. The third part of the explanation is that these primitive intuitions are unlearned and more objective truths are acquired only by trusting legitimate expertise. Scientists, journalists, historians, government record-keeping agencies. Few of us can actually justify our beliefs, including the true ones, surveys have shown that people who deny the consensus of science, creationists and climate deniers, are not scientifically illiterate. In fact, on tests of scientific literacy, they score the same as people who endorse the scientific consensus. The only difference is politics. The farther to the right, the more denial there is of climate science and evolution. So weird beliefs persist in people who don't trust the establishment, who think of scientists and government record keepers and journalists as just another self-interested tribe. Finally, part of the answer to the question of why people believe outlandish things is, depends what you mean by believe. As a cognitive psychologist, I've come to realize that people hold two kinds of beliefs. There are beliefs in what I call the reality zone. This would be the physical objects around them, the other people they deal with face to face, the memory of their interactions with them. Beliefs in this zone are held to be testable, and people hold them if they are true. They have no choice, because reality is unforgiving. You can't keep gas in the car and food in the fridge and the kids clothed and fed and off to school on time unless you are in touch with the hard truths of reality. On the other hand, there's what I call the mythology zone. These include the distant past, the unknowable future, faraway peoples and places, remote corridors of power, what really happens in the White House or 10 Downing Street or the Kremlin or the boardrooms of big corporations, the microscopic, the cosmic, the counterfactual, the metaphysical. Beliefs in this zone are held because they are entertaining, they are uplifting, they're empowering, they're morally edifying. Whether they are true or false is unknowable, according to our intuitions, and kind of irrelevant. That's not why you hold these beliefs. Examples include religion, which almost by definition consists of beliefs that you hold by faith rather than evidence. National myths, the great heroes and martyrs who founded our great nation. Historical fiction. Does anyone really ask the question of whether Henry V issued those stirring words that Shakespeare attributed to him on the battlefield? Fake news and conspiracy theories. People who believe that there is an all-powerful oppressive state seem to have no compunctions about sharing this view in public, where they would be vulnerable to arrest and imprisonment by the all-powerful state. Or take, for example, the belief in Pizzagate. This was the predecessor of QAnon, conspiracy theory according to which Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring out of the basement of Comet Ping-Pong Pizzeria in the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Now, among people who believed in Pizzagate, how did they react? Well, an example would be that one believer left a one-star review on Google of the pizzeria. Said the dough is incredibly underbaked. There was some specific-looking thing plenty of my son. Now, this is the kind of response that you have with regarding children being raped in the basement. Presumably, you call the police. So what does belief Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring mean? I think an accurate translation would be, I think Hillary is so depraved that that's the kind of thing she's capable of. Or I think an even more accurate translation of that belief would be Hillary. Ooh. Which is to say that beliefs can be expressions of moral convictions, at least in the zone in which it doesn't actually infringe on our daily lives. Bertrand Russell once said, "It is undesirable to believe a proposition when there is no ground whatsoever for supposing it is true." Now, if you think that that is a obvious, banal, unexceptionable statement, then you are a product of the Enlightenment who believes that there can be evidence for all of these beliefs, but this goes very much against human nature. In fact, Bertrand Russell's apparently innocuous statement is a radical, unnatural manifesto. All of this leads to the question, how could we become more rational? Well, to start with, the tools of formal rationality, logical possibility, Bayes' rule, game theory, correlation, and causation, I think should be part of the cognitive toolkit of every educated person. That rationality should be the fourth R together with reading, writing, and arithmetic in the nation's schools. But it isn't enough just to teach something in school, because as an educator, I would be the first to concede that generally pupils get lessons in the classroom as soon as they can drive an exam. These have to be part of the definitionist, part of the etiquette and mores of the rational course. It should be an awareness of typical cognitive fallacies like the availability bias, the my-side bias, argument and should be promoted and just part of our conceptual wisdom. The ideal of basing beliefs on evidence, changing one's mind when the evidence changes, should be seen as signs of strength, not as weakness. I'm going to quote a friend who is a technical writer at Google, a linguist and farmer, who signs her emails, "It's not about being right, it's about getting it right." Those are watchwords. Third, the institutions that promote rationality, with their rules for overcoming human fallacies and biases, must be safeguarded. In institutions, one person can notice and make up for another person's biases. This helps explain the puzzle of how individually rational people can be capable of, individually irrational capable of feats of great rationality. They can make us collectively more rational than any of us is individually. For example, if you give people simple logic problems, 1 out of 10 will get the correct solution in many of these puzzles. But if you put people in small groups, then 7 out of 10 get it right. All it takes is for one person to spot the correct answer, and he or she can almost always convince the other members of the group of the solution. What do I mean by rationality promoting institutions? Well, at least in theory, there's science with its demand for empirical testing and its institution peer review. There's democratic government with its checks and balances. Journalism with its demands for editing and fact-checking. The judicial system with the adversarial proceedings. Academia, at least in theory, with the ideal of freedom of inquiry and open debate. And even Wikipedia, which has its flaws, but is surprisingly accurate thanks to the community of editors that can alter one another's work, and the commitment that they all sign up onto of objectivity and neutrality. Most social media, not so much. What it means is that to safeguard these institutions and their reputation and the trust in them, experts should acknowledge their fallibility. We start out ignorant of everything, and that should be made clear that the people with a claim to expertise should not be priests, they should not be oracles. They should be prepared to show their work, why they believe what they believe, and gratuitous politicization should be acknowledged. This, I believe, is a severe problem with our august institutions of science today, which seem to be falling over themselves in an attempt to brand themselves with flaming left-wing rhetoric, and symbolism and tropes, completely unaware of the fact that this is guaranteed to alienate the center and the right of the American population, to say nothing of politicians. So in sum, why do members of a rational species behave so irrationally? They deploy their rationality to win rather than to learn. They fall back on primitive intuitions. They distrust the institutions of rationality, and they treat beliefs as moral fictions, not empirical hypotheses. Thank you.
A year ago, I spoke to you about a book that I was just in the process of completing that has come out in the interim, and I would like to talk to you today about some of the controversies that book inspired. The book is called The Blank Slate, based on the popular idea that the human mind is a blank slate and that all of its structure comes from socialization, culture, parenting, experience. The blank slate was an influential idea in the 20th century. Here are a few quotes indicating that man has no nature, from the historian Jose Ortega y Gasset. Man has no instincts, from the anthropologist Ashley Montagu. The human brain is capable of a full range of behaviors and predisposed to none, from the late scientist Stephen Jay Gould. There are a number of reasons to doubt that the human mind is a blank slate. And some of them just come from common sense. As many people have told me over the years, anyone who's had more than one child knows that kids come into the world with certain temperaments and talents. It doesn't all come from the outside. Oh, and anyone who has both a child and a house pet has surely noticed that the child exposed to speech will acquire a human language, whereas the house pet won't, presumably because of some innate difference between them. And anyone who's ever been in a heterosexual relationship knows that the minds of men and the minds of women are not indistinguishable. There are also, I think, increasing results from the scientific study of humans that indeed we're not born blank slates. One of them from anthropology is the study of human universals. If you've ever taken anthropology, you know that it's a kind of an occupational pleasure of anthropologists to show how exotic other cultures can be, and that there are places out there where supposedly everything is the opposite to the way it is here. But if you instead look at what is common to the world's cultures, you find that there is an enormously rich set of behaviors and emotions and ways of construing the world that can be found in all of the world's 6,000 odd cultures. The anthropologist Donald Brown has tried to list them all, and they range from aesthetics, affection, and age statuses, all the way down to weaning, weapons, weather, attempts to control the color white, and a world view. Also, genetics and neuroscience are increasingly showing that the brain is intricately structured. This is a recent study by the neurobiologist Paul Thompson and his colleagues in which they, using MRI, measured the distribution of gray matter, that is the outer layer of the cortex, in a large sample of pairs of people. And they coded correlations in the thickness of gray matter in different parts of the brain using a false color scheme in which no difference is coded as purple, and any color other than purple indicates a statistically significant correlation. Well, this is what happens when you pair people up at random. By definition, the two people picked at random can't have correlations in the distribution of gray matter in the cortex. This is what happens in people who share half of their DNA, fraternal twins. And as you can see, large amounts of the brain are not purple, showing that if one person has a thicker bit of cortex in that region, so does his fraternal twin. And here's what happens if you get a pair of people who share all of their DNA, namely clones or identical twins. And you can see huge areas of cortex where there are massive correlations in the distribution of gray matter. Now, these aren't just differences in anatomy, like the shape of your earlobes, but they have consequences in thought and behavior that are well illustrated in this famous cartoon by Charles Addams. Separated at birth, the Malafert twins meet accidentally. And as you can see, there are two inventors with identical contraptions in their lap meeting in the waiting room of a patent attorney. Now, the cartoon is not such an exaggeration, because studies of identical twins who were separated at birth and then tested in adulthood show that they have astonishing similarities. And this happens in every pair of identical twins separated at birth ever studied, much less so with fraternal twins separated at birth. My favorite example is of a pair of twins, one of whom was brought up as a Catholic in a Nazi family in Germany. The other was brought up in a Jewish family in Trinidad. When they walked into the lab in Minnesota, they were wearing identical navy blue shirts with epaulettes. Both of them liked to dip buttered toast in coffee. Both of them kept rubber bands around their wrists. Both of them flushed the toilet before using it as well as after. And both of them liked to surprise people by sneezing in crowded elevators to watch them jump. Now, the story might seem too good to be true, but when you administer batteries of psychological tests, you get the same results, namely identical twins separated at birth show quite astonishing similarities. Now, given both that common sense and scientific data are calling the doctrine of the blank slate into question, why should it have been such an appealing notion? Well, there are a number of political reasons why people have found it congenial. The foremost is that if we're blank slates, then by definition we are equal, because 0 equals 0 equals 0. But if something is written on the slate, then some people could have more of it than others, and according to this line of thinking, that would justify discrimination and inequality. Another political fear of human nature is that if we were blank slates, we can perfect mankind, the age-old dream of the perfectibility of our species, through social engineering, whereas if we're born with certain instincts, then perhaps some of them might condemn us to selfishness, prejudice, and violence. Well, in the book, I argue that these are, in fact, non sequiturs. And just to make a long story short, first of all, the concept of fairness is not the same as the concept of sameness. And so when Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," he did not mean we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are clones. Rather, that all men are equal in terms of their rights, and that every person ought to be treated as an individual and not prejudged by the statistics of particular groups that they may belong to. Also, even if we were born with certain ignoble motives, they don't automatically lead to ignoble behavior. And that is because the human mind is a complex system with many parts, and some of them can inhibit others. For example, there's excellent reason to believe that virtually all humans are born with a moral sense. And we have cognitive abilities that allow us to profit from the lessons of history. So even if people did have impulses towards selfishness or greed, that's not the only thing in the skull, and there are other parts of the mind that can counteract them. And in the book, I go over controversies such as this one and a number of other hot buttons, hot zones, Chernobyls, third rails, and so on, including the arts, cloning, crime, free will, education, evolution, gender differences, God, homosexuality, infanticide, inequality, Marxism, morality, Nazism, parenting, politics, race, rape, religion, resource depletion, social engineering, technological risk, and war. And needless to say, there were certain risks in taking on these subjects. When I wrote a first draft of the book, I circulated it to a number of colleagues for comments, and here are some of the reactions that I got. Better get a security camera for your house. Don't expect to get any more awards, job offers, or positions in scholarly societies. Tell your publisher not to list your hometown in your author bio. Do you have tenure? Well, the book came out in October, and nothing terrible has happened. There was indeed reason to be nervous, and there were moments in which I did feel nervous, knowing the history of what has happened to people who've taken controversial stands or discovered disquieting findings in the behavioral sciences. There are many cases, some of which I talk about in the book, of people who've been slandered, called Nazis, physically assaulted, threatened with criminal prosecution for stumbling across or arguing about controversial findings. And you never know when you're going to come across one of these booby traps. My favorite example is a pair of psychologists who did research on left-handers and published some data showing that left-handers are, on average, more susceptible to disease, more prone to accidents, and have a shorter lifespan. It's not clear, by the way, since then whether that is an accurate generalization, but the data at the time seemed to support that. Well, pretty soon they were barraged with enraged letters, death threats, ban on the topic in a number of scientific journals coming from irate left-handers and their advocates. And they were literally afraid to open their mail because of the venom and vituperation that they had inadvertently inspired. Well, I mean, the night is young, but so the book has been out for half a year, and nothing terrible has happened. None of the dire professional consequences has taken place. I haven't been exiled from the city of Cambridge. But what I wanted to talk about are two of these hot buttons that have aroused the strongest response in the 80-odd reviews that the blank slate has received. I'll just put that list up for a few seconds and see if you can guess which two topics. I would estimate that probably two of these topics inspired probably 90% of the reaction in the various reviews and radio interviews. It's not violence and war, it's not race, it's not gender, it's not Marxism, it's not Nazism. They are the arts and parenting. So let me tell you what aroused such irate responses, and I'll let you decide whether the claims are really that outrageous. Well, let me start with the arts. I note that among the long list of human universals that I presented a few slides ago are art. There is no society ever discovered in the remotest corner of the world that has not had something that we would consider the arts. Visual arts, decoration of surfaces and bodies appears to be a human universal. Telling of stories, music, dance, poetry found in all cultures, and many of the motifs and themes that give us pleasure in the arts can be found in all human societies. A preference for symmetrical forms, the use of repetition and variation, even things as specific as the fact that in poetry all over the world you have lines that are very close to 3 seconds long, separated by pauses. Now, on the other hand, in the second half of the 20th century, the arts are frequently said to be in decline. And I have a collection probably 10 or 15 headlines from highbrow magazines deploring the fact that the arts are in decline in our time. I'll give you a couple of representative quotes. We can assert with some confidence that our own period is one of decline, that the standards of culture are lower than they were 50 years ago, and that the evidences of this decline are visible in every department of human activity. That's a quote from T.S. Eliot, a little more than 50 years ago. And a more recent one. The possibility of sustaining high culture in our time is becoming increasingly problematical. Serious bookstores are losing their franchise. Non-profit theaters are surviving primarily by commercializing their repertory. Symphony orchestras are diluting their programs. Public television is increasing its dependence on reruns of British sitcoms. Classical radio stations are dwindling. Museums are resorting to blockbuster shows. Dance is dying. That's from Robert Brustein, the famous drama critic and director in The New Republic about 5 years ago. Well, in fact, the arts are not in decline. I don't think this would come as a surprise to anyone in this room, but by any standard, they have never been flourishing to a greater extent. There are, of course, entirely new art forms and new media, many of which you've heard over these few days. By any economic standard, the demand for art of all forms is skyrocketing, as you can tell from the price of opera tickets, by the number of books sold, by the number of books published, the number of musical titles released, the number of new albums, and so on. The only grain of truth to this complaint that the arts are in decline come from three spheres. One of them is in elite art since the 1930s, say the kinds of works performed by major symphony orchestras, where most of the repertory is before 1930, or the works shown in major galleries and prestigious museums. In literary criticism and analysis, probably 40 or 50 years ago, literary critics were a kind of cultural hero. Now they're kind of a national joke. And in the humanities and arts programs in the universities, which by many measures indeed are in decline. Students are staying away in droves. Universities are disinvesting in the arts and humanities. Well, here's a diagnosis. They didn't ask me, but by their own admission, they need all the help that they can get. And I would like to suggest that it's not a coincidence that this supposed decline in the elite arts and criticism occurred in the same point in history in which there was a widespread denial of human nature. A famous quotation can be found, if you look on the web, you can find it in literally scores of English course syllabuses. In or about December 1910, human nature changed. A paraphrase of a quote by Virginia Woolf, and there's some debate as to what she actually meant by that, but it's very clear looking at these syllabuses that it's used now as a way of saying that all of the forms of appreciation of art that were in place for centuries or millennia in the 20th century were discarded. That beauty and pleasure in art, probably a human universal, began to be considered saccharine or kitsch or commercial. Barnett Newman had a famous quote that the impulse of modern art is the desire to destroy beauty, which was considered bourgeois or tacky. Here's just one example. I mean, this is perhaps a representative example of visual depiction of the female form in the 15th century. Here is a representative example of the depiction of the female form in the 20th century. And as you can see, something has changed in the way the elite arts appeal to the senses. Indeed, in movements of modernism and postmodernism, there was visual art without beauty, literature without narrative and plot, poetry without meter and rhyme, architecture and planning without ornament, human scale, green space, natural light, music without melody and rhythm, and criticism without clarity, attention to aesthetics, and insight into the human condition. Let me just give you an example to back up that last statement. But here, one of the most famous literary English scholars of our time is the Berkeley professor Judith Butler. And here is an example of one of her analyses. The move from a structuralist account in which capital is understood to structure social relations in relatively homologous ways to a view of hegemony in which power relations are subject to repetition, convergence, and rearticulation brought the question of temporality into the thinking of structure and marked a shift from a form of Althusserian theory that takes structural totalities as theoretical objects. Well, you get the idea. By the way, this is one sentence. You can actually parse it. Well, the argument in the blank slate was that elite art and criticism in the 20th century, although not the arts in general, have disdained beauty, pleasure, clarity, insight, and style. People are staying away from elite art and criticism. What a puzzle. I wonder why. Well, this turned out to be probably the most controversial claim in the book. Someone asked me whether I stuck it in order to deflect ire from discussions of gender and Nazism and race and so on. I won't comment on that. But it certainly inspired an energetic reaction from many university professors. Well, the other hot button is parenting. And the starting point is for that discussion was the fact that we have all been subject to the advice of the parenting industrial complex. Now here is a representative quote from a besieged mother. "I'm overwhelmed with parenting advice. I'm supposed to do lots of physical activity with my kids so I can instill in them a physical fitness habit so they'll grow up to be healthy adults. And I'm supposed to do all kinds of intellectual play so they'll grow up smart. And there are all kinds of play. Clay for finger dexterity, word games for reading success, large motor play, small motor play. I feel like I could devote my life to figuring out what to play with my kids." And I think anyone who's recently been a parent can sympathize with this mother. Well, here's some sobering facts about parenting. Most studies of parenting on which this advice is based are useless. They're useless because they don't control for heritability. They measure some correlation between what the parents do, how the children turn out, and assume a causal relation, that the parenting shaped the child. Parents who talk a lot to their kids have kids who grew up to be articulate. Parents who spank their kids have kids who grew up to be violent, and so on. And very few of them control for the possibility that parents pass on genes that increase the chances a child will be articulate or violent, and so on, until the studies are redone with adoptive children who provide an environment but not genes to their kids. We have no way of knowing whether these conclusions are valid. The genetically controlled studies have some sobering results. Remember the Malafert twins, separated at birth, then they meet in the patent office, remarkably similar. Well, what would have happened if the Malafert twins had grown up together? You might think, well, then they'd be even more similar because not only would they share their genes, but they would also share their environment. That would make them super similar, right? Wrong. Identical twins, or any siblings who are separated at birth, are no less similar than if they had grown up together. Everything that happens to you in a given home over all of those years appears to leave no permanent stamp on your personality or intellect. A complementary finding from a completely different methodology is that adopted siblings reared together, the mirror image of identical twins reared apart, they share their parents, their home, their neighborhood, don't share their genes, end up not similar at all. Okay, two different bodies of research with a similar finding. What it suggests is that children are shaped not by their parents over the long run, but in part, only in part, by their genes, in part by their culture, the culture of the country at large, and the children's own culture, namely their peer group, as we heard from Jill Sobule earlier today. That's what kids care about. And to a very large extent, larger than most people are prepared to acknowledge, by chance. Chance events in the wiring of the brain in utero, chance events as you live your life. So let me conclude with just a remark to bring it back to the theme of choices. I think that the sciences of human nature, behavioral genetics, evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science, are going to increasingly, in the years to come, upset various dogmas, careers, and deeply held political belief systems. And that presents us with a choice. The choice is whether certain facts about humans or topics are to be considered taboos, forbidden knowledge, where we shouldn't
Not a single